So welcome everyone. We just wanted to first off, welcome in the new year with some old problems, but the new year is an opportunity to really, take a fresh perspective. And we also wanted to thank so many of you who've been in touch with us in the last week because of the Marshall Fire that happened in our community 6 days ago and destroyed 991 homes. People we know lost their homes. It was very, very, very close to our house.
110 mile an hour wind.
Yeah.
Very scary.
Very scary.
Very cold now.
And it was actually kind of funny to see how we responded, to on one level where it's like, oh my God, we're going to have to evacuate. And so we looked at each other and said, grab the passports, grab the computers. We got a couple of backpacks ready. And then
as time went on, we started grabbing more and more things.
Yeah, then like an hour later, we still hadn't had to evacuate. So I pulled out a couple suitcases and I threw in the rolling pin and some kitchen knives. And, it's like what you choose. It was so random. But in that first moment, there was this feeling of, we have some things that, we can let go of. And and then watching whether it's greed or our habitual patterns or our attachments to things creep back in was quite fascinating. And the unfortunate thing, which has just been mind-boggling for our community, has been how many people have been impacted by this. And fortunately, there have not been too much loss of life, and it could have been far worse, but it was pretty scary. So we wanted to thank you all for thinking of us and putting some metta and goodwill out in the direction of the Boulder community, because it needs it right now. So anyway, what we want to do, and we thought this is a topic that might expand out beyond this one talk or not, but at this time of year, one of the things people do often is to make resolutions, the New Year's resolutions that will, possibly inspire them, possibly, discipline them for a certain period of time.
Sometimes almost half a day.
Yeah, some of them almost half a day, and just looking at what it actually, like what that ritual is about, and where it came from a little bit, and how it relates to some of the teachings on, sort of self and non-self and intention and other and interconnectedness and self-reflection that are really a big part of the yoga teachings.
Mm-hmm. The ability to frame an experience is huge in the yoga tradition, and sometimes we don't frame it well.
Yeah.
Or we get attached to the frame, and but it's almost I think it's stronger in some cultures, the New Year's idea.
Yeah.
And then
and as we started looking at it, it turns out that resolutions at the New Year really have been around for a long time. In Babylon, that was where part of the tradition began, to sort of evaluate what has the past year been, and then what. At that point, it was also a thing of, well, let me pay my debts that are outstanding and let me take some responsibility for some of my actions in the coming year. And then as you look at how this has morphed, and, I was looking at like the New York Times magazine the other day, and the idea of that is perpetuated so much in modern culture is, New Year's is a time to make resolutions about yourself. I'm going to stop. A big one, as you look at what the big ones are, a big one is going to stop drinking, which is, and then it turns out that there was a study done in, I forget, some university in, I think, Ohio or something like that in 2014 about the kinds of resolutions in the West many people make. And they are things like exercise more or stop drinking or get a better diet and sort of like taking care of the body a little better, which is not a bad thing. But the study found that of the people who they surveyed who had made resolutions, something like 91% just never followed through on them. And some huge number, and it was like 45%, after they made the resolution, didn't even remember what the resolution was a few days later. So it's this opportunity to take a look at our lives and to look closely at who we are and what we are about and why we are here. And yet, due to cultural, sort of habitual patterns, as well as sort of the way we have evolved within the world, the idea has become very much self-centered and sort of pedantic, and not so much something that one does as an improvement or a wish for the world to be better, but more like something for me to be better. And that's, when you compare that kind of resolution to something like a vow that would be like the Bodhisattva vow, or even a vow that we might take in our own lives, in a marriage, a relationship or something, where there is this real sense of heartfelt truth and connectedness to others, there's a real discrepancy there. And so it's interesting to just explore that, because resolutions are great. They help us to get clarity. But if we can put them in a bigger context, they help probably even more. And so, for instance, when you, if you make, one of the things that the way the resolutions have evolved in my lifetime is it's sort of like when I was a young kid, resolutions were more like Lent, where you gave something up, or it was almost like a penance that you had to do. And then rather than something more generous, an offering or something like that. And then as I've, grown, and it's 60 years, 70 years later, what we've started to see is you go to these New Year's events a few years ago when we were still going to New Year's events. And, they'll have some fire ceremony, and you do reflect back on your year, and you offer into the fire some of your...
write it on a piece of paper and throw it in the fire, which, depending on what you say...
can be good.
Could be good.
Yeah. So there's this potential to take that ritual in our non-ritualistic culture and really do something profound with it. And when you do something like offer your resolutions into the fire, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Indian thought and Hindu thought that offering things into the fire really is a way of making them, making the gods know you mean it, being serious about it.
It's a sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice.
And there are also traditional things you're supposed to be saying and doing, but then sometimes the real motive, and even in the mythology, even the gods participate in the sacrifices. because they're even more religious than we are. And oftentimes, their motives are what, all the teachings reveal, that the motive is really not love of others, but the motive is, to improve your own situation. And if you're in a bad place, to get out of it. And so...
And so the trap becomes this trap that we identify with ourself as something separate from everything else. So it's the classic avidya, or ignorance, and self-identity in a sense, in a way, being this idea of actually being completely separate, so that there isn't this dependent arising of oneself, but it is a separate arising, a non-dependent arising of oneself. And what happens when we flip into a mindset like that is a couple of things, and that is why it is called ignorance, or avidya. And the first thing, as we all know, if we've studied yoga at all, is that asmita, or I amness, comes out of that, and which might be called ego function.
Yeah.
But also a great deal of suffering comes out of it. Not only when you are driven by your ego, do you grasp onto things or reject other things, but there is this sort of tendency to want to explore and go deeply into oneself, to really just figure out who you really are. But you're looking for something that is separate, that is not
separate from everything
else.
Yeah.
And so you're looking for something that doesn't exist. And that causes a great deal of stress and anxiety and ultimately suffering, because you are looking in every way you can for something that simply is not there.
I think a lot of us are lost in that, and part of our intelligence we're not aware of knows that we're looking for something that doesn't even exist, like the immortal separate me. Which a lot of people think that's what yoga, they misread the Yoga Sutra, and they think, oh, that's what kaivalyam means. It means, I'm out of here. See ya later, suckers. It's kind of sad. And I think that these many traditions, are aware of this problem, that a lot of, there's this ignorance, and I'm looking for the true me. And the words are very confusing for people.
And so we thought that it might be helpful to look at a text that many of you who've studied with us have looked at with us, but look at it with new eyes. That is a classic Upanishad text, that the Kena Upanishad, that really addresses this idea of identity, and how not only all of us fall into this trap of looking for our identity or being driven by our identity. Maybe I'll even tell that story about being in the parking lot after you go into Richard and I'll go ahead and tell it now. Richard and I, when
I'm
he's
not
looking
sure
at
which
me.
story you're talking about.
Well, maybe a couple weeks ago, we were out one evening and doing a couple of errands and going to pick up some food, some carry out. And so we'd put the order in to pick up the carry out, and we had been to Whole Foods right before that. But there was going to be like a 15-minute wait. And so, we entertained ourselves by just sitting in the car watching who was going in and out of Whole Foods, which tells you a lot about our social life. That was kind of a highlight. And as we did this, and I had gone in to just pick one item up, and I'd walked up to the door that usually opens, and it didn't open, and it was this strange event and then I kind of looked around trying to see what was going on, and then someone came out. And so as they came out, I realized, oh, the doors are open, so I walked on in. But that's what we were watching, was this door. And you could see it was absolutely entertaining, because you'd see like this one guy walked up and he was all, he was very self-assured and very clear, and we're going, uh-oh, he's going to get there. He is identifying with who he is so deeply, and then he's in command, and suddenly there's this moment where it backfired, and he kind of, it really, you could tell that it really kind of pissed him off, and he got all like a little bit annoyed, walked around the corner, and it was a bad thing for him. And other people had other kinds of responses to it. And this one sweet street person came up and walked up, and the door didn't open, and stood there just waiting and looking. And this other person walked up next to them, and they were calm. And so it was this thing where the person who was calm and had this response to something interrupting their identity kind of handled it well. The person who was on the bike who tried to go in, the person with a cart who was trying to go in, they got distressed because their plan, their identity was a little bit challenged. And it was very entertaining to watch this. And in that, we ourselves do that kind of thing all the time. And it was a good self-reflection for us.
Yeah,
and someone
particularly
was
in today's world.
Yeah.
I mean, I've noticed that in myself, and then I've noticed other. Have you ever gotten angry at an inanimate object? Like,
when you stubbed your toe.
Yeah. And said unkind words. Like, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
It's like a plague that's everywhere.
And when we run into situations like that, it's this wake-up call, this opportunity to say, who am I really? What am I identifying with? This is breaking my habitual patterning and thought pattern. And let me look again.
Mm.
And that's what the Kena Upanishad really...
Yeah, there's actually some story that is exactly parallel to that. But I should do the first part first, and then we'll quickly. And so this Upanishad is, it's really a mind, I can't say mind destroyer, but it will take everything you think and just like leave you. And that's the idea of it. And so it starts out with the word, I have the book here. Kena ishitam bhatati preshitam anaha, kena prana pratama praiti yuktaha. And so it's asking by whom, and it's not giving you the answer. It says, by whom does the mind go forth? By whose will, by whose desire does the mind go forth? And by whom is it that prana comes forth first? And then, and at whose will do people speak? And these are questions. And then my favorite one, and ka udevo yunakti, and ka means who, and who is the God that links together your eye and your ear. And have you ever noticed that, you're simultaneously looking and hearing, and those are all coordinated in your awareness of, things around you. And so it asks the question, and these are questions that are like, who? And particularly the word ka, which just means who. And then the answer is given. It's the ear of the ear. So when you're hearing, it's really, it's also implying, you have an ear of your ear, and then you have a mind of your mind, and you have an eye of your eye, and then you have a breath of your breath. What is it breathing? these are all like, if the kind of questions like, and once you start that process, this is a very famous thing. It's like, oh, this is the cause. And so you imagine, oh, inside my eye, there's a little tiny me, which is the true Atman, but it has an eye too. And inside there's a little ear. And this is, to someone who's studying this, is supposed to be like a joke. Ha ha, oh. And then seeing that, then you go, oh, ha, and you let go of it. You go, ah, because you see there's an infinite regress of like little things or little selves. And we imagine, like you imagine your true self to be like a little person, maybe that tall. And they're standing inside of your heart, or they're standing inside, that space in your brain between the pituitary and the pineal gland. There's this little space, and that's the real you. And it happens, probably you imagine it to look like a human, or a traditional god with 4 arms or fancy crown or something. But then and this is the famous story, like, oh, what is the question, what supports the world? And in Indian mythology would say, well, the entire world is supported by a turtle or a tortoise, depending on whether and then everybody is satisfied by that answer, and that's the religious answer. Oh, I can relax now because the whole universe is supported by a turtle. Unfortunately, turtle or tortoises tend to move slowly, and so if you're going to get somebody to hold you up, but then it's always the child or the innocent one who says, but what's holding up the turtle? And so the classical answer, well, under the turtle, there's another turtle holding up the turtle. And then the same little kid says, well, what's holding up that second turtle? And then the teacher says, well, there's another turtle under that turtle. And then the kid holds up the hand again, and he says, oh, it's just an infinite chain of turtles, which makes you then go like this. Like, oh, that's silly. It's like, what are you talking about? You haven't even, the original mystery hasn't even been addressed by your so-called turtle.
And this is the mind inquiring into, really, who am I? Who, it is as the mind is looking for the solid object.
By whom, yeah.
Yeah, let me identify with myself. That search that we talked about, that's ongoing, that no one can, find. Yeah. This is the story of that. Yeah. And it is, we do it in every single realm that we become conscious in.
Yeah. And so in that, there's all of a sudden a letting go or a placing down. It's not really a placing down. It's like neuro. It's just like, and it's almost like, and in that you taste, you can let go of you let go of everything, according to this text, the entire world, and you get what is called amrita, and which is, I like the translation nectar, but it means no death. Maybe those are the same thing, but it doesn't mean that, and the question is, who gets it? It's not a bunch of turtles and things. And so the text throws you right into this ridiculous paradox.
And is that, this just occurred to me, but is that state similar to the idea of equanimity that arises with upekshanam, when you just hold space, but you don't really, is that related to it or not related to it, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
So it's the same, yeah.
Or if you like yoga, which nirodha is like, but with no sense of it being negative, like, but it's more like, because you're completely, the intellect is completely dumbfounded. Mm-hmm. It's like, what? And so what that state, they say that the eye doesn't go there, the speech doesn't express it, the mind can't know it, And so then the Upanishad says, and so we have no idea how this could be taught to anybody. And so this is the whole mission of the early Upanishads, is teaching that. And so we have no idea of any technique that would actually teach that. And so it's a very humble text. And it's not what is known. And so what you know is a mental construct based on, symbols and logic and, things being reduced to names and things. And then, but more importantly, it isn't what you don't know. And this is an interesting thing in the another Upanishad. It says that if you think that what you have, the stories or the formulations you've created in mind are actually then you're going to suffer. But if you think that it is the unknown, or you just cancel, that it's a cancellation of that, then you're going to really suffer much worse. And so it's like, oh no, what have they done? And so it can't be expressed with speech. It is not thought by the mind, but it's that by which the mind thinks. And so, most clever. And so then there's another chapter, and in which we can watch ourselves. And this, you can watch, I watch myself, wait a minute, I watch myself. Did you? I watch the mind, and it comes up with all of these contradictions. So if you think you've understood it, you know it but slightly. If whether it refers to you or even to the gods. So the gods are the more exalted, selfish stories in our own minds, and so it should be investigated. And so you say, I don't think I know it well, but I do think that I do not know it. And the one who among us knows it, and two, does not know that he does not know it. And so if to whomever it's known, it is not known. To whomever it is known, he does not know it. It is not understood by those who understand it, but it's understood by those who don't understand it. And at this point, you're like, okay. And and if you want to study the Kena Upanishad, here's two of my favorite verses, okay? And they're coming. This is in the second chapter, verse 4 and verse 5. So these are very short chapters. And so when you know it, and what we're talking about, we can't even describe to you or express it, but you know what we're talking about. And it's the most important thing. When it is known through every state of cognition, it is rightly known. Okay, and so...
So what do you think that means? Through every state of cognition?
Yeah, so I was just thinking of the Yoga Sutra where they say chitta vrittis. So, and the chitta vrittis are every kind of state of mind, whether wild imagination or heavenly deities or beautiful songs or horrible death or blowing up of planets or hellish things. All of those are different states of cognition, simple and complex, and all of them, if looked at with the inquiring mind, the mind that says Kena, the mind that says Ka, or that keeps inquiring and looking, then you get that taste of immortality, of the Amrita, or that which is it's not even subject to death because there's nothing to it. And then here in verse 5, if a person knows it here, and they use the word here, iha, if you know it here in the present moment, then you actually know it. It's not like, so we're trying to figure out philosophically, what is this self that evolves, that transmigrates, and all of these things. But if you know it here, then you actually know it. And if here he knows it, not if you don't know it here, if you're not experiencing it in your current experience, this most precious of things, then it's tragic. He says that basically the Buddha says that's the worst tragedy. And then here's my favorite thing. It goes right down to it. Bhuteshu, bhuteshu, in all beings, in all beings. So seeing whatever this is, you have to see in all beings, and they repeat it, in all beings, in all beings. Then you get the taste. And so then they say, and in departing the world, and we think then, 20 years from now when I die, or, because we'll be optimistic, in 50 years when we give up these mortal coils. But it's actually, you're departing the world in the present moment as you experience this. So it's quite cool.
Which goes, back to this idea of identity setting resolutions, or when we set the resolutions or set our plans for the future on some abstract idea that we cannot know.
Theoretical
self that doesn't even exist. And a theoretical situation and story that doesn't even exist. That is destined to sort of not materialize because it's complete fantasy, it's complete illusion. And so that's quite fascinating to look at in terms of the idea of being stuck in our identities.
Yeah. And
our
unable to see
patterns.
It, and the inability, because you can't even get a taste for you can get a taste for others.
Mm-hmm.
And yet this whole thing is in others. And so then the story starts. And so this is then illustrated with this very clever story. And so once upon a time, the gods, and three in particular, Agni, fire, and Vayu, who is wind, and then Indra, who is the big, the most important one. He's the most impressive. They were sitting around after this big war in which they had defeated some terrible demons, some radical psychopaths who were probably trying to take over not just this planet, but the entire world. They had defeated it, and so they were sitting around in their very nice homes, off in Indraloka, and congratulating themselves and doing what they do. And but inside of each of them, Brahman, who is this mystery, knew that they were doing this, and so it decided to trick them. And so Brahman knew their conceit, and then so Brahman appeared to them as what is called a yaksha. And so aksha means your eye, and yaksha means coming right before the eye. And so that which is the immediate experience coming right before the eye. And in this early Upanishad, I know in Thailand, and there are many statues of yakshas, and they're often very scary because they're like, and they have their tongues out and flames coming out around them, and
protecting.
They're protecting. Yeah, but yaksha is just anything that appears before the eye, and so in the Kena Upanishad, the yaksha is like a very cute little mysterious thing, like a little owl or a little bunny rabbit, or you're not quite sure what it is. And so this little cute yaksha appears, and the three gods, who are basically sitting around, toasting each other, look over and they go, what is that? And because they can't identify it, and these are the specialists of knowledge, they can know everything and they consume everything, control everything, particularly Indra, who's Indra, Louis XIV in France would
Paled.
It would come off as a bodhisattva next to Indra. Okay, you got it right. And so they said, who is that yaksha? And so they sent Agni. So Agni is fire, and we've just had some experience with, and still some experiences with fire in our neighborhood. But as you know, fire is like pretty powerful stuff, and being since before the evolution of human beings, there were fires and volcanoes and like, oh my Lord. And so they sent the god of fire, why don't you go find out who that little yaksha is? And so Agni went over, and he, was very intimidating, I think. And he went up to the yaksha, and he said, but the yaksha said to him, he didn't say to the yaksha, who are you? The yaksha said to him, who are you? Who are you? So he asked him, the ka question, who are you? And imagine, and this is something that it's unusual for these guys, because normally they would go up, it's like the police in many places. They'll come up to you and they'll want to know, who are you? And when the police come up to you and you have, this, you ask the police, who are you? And possibly this will surprise the police.
And it's a good question, because it's getting them to look deeply at how are they identifying with themselves.
Yeah,
of course, you could get
you?
arrested if you do that.
Or worse,
Or worse.
Depending on your social situation. And why? And Agni said, well, I am Agni. I'm the Jata Veda, or the one who knows almost everything, because he can consume everything. And so, and then the little mysterious, I like to think, sometimes I think of the yaksha as being like a little tiny baby owl, because we actually had a run-in with one a few years ago who would walk right up to you and go, ooh. It was totally fearless. And so the little yaksha said, well, what power do you have, Agni? And he said, well, and he kind of laughed, he says, I can burn everything that there is in this realm on Earth. And he probably, you look at like volcanoes, and it's like, wow. And then, so the little yaksha, he took a blade of grass and he put it in front of him. And so the blade of grass is a symbol for humility, because, grass grows. And so he took the blade of grass, which part of and he put it right in front of Agni. He said, oh, burn that. And of course, this blade of grass is, in the present moment, Brahman. And so Agni like, and nothing happened. And so Agni is like, he'd never seen anything that couldn't be burnt. And so and he turned around, he went back to his friends and said, I couldn't figure out what was going on. And so then they sent Vayu over, and Vayu is, of course, the wind, which can be pretty powerful, as we've learned. And so he goes up, and he blows right up to the little yaksha and is about to question and the yaksha says, who are you? And what? And he says, I'm Vayu. I am the the Lord of breath and everything, and I keep things alive. And so, and what power do you have? Well, I can blow everything around that's here on the earth. And you go, wow. And so again, he took a blade of grass and he put it in front of him, and tremendous winds. I mean, like
Hurricane force.
yeah,
Beyond.
yeah, beyond. And nothing happened to the grass. It's just like, and so Vayu is, of course, then also like, wow. And because none of this, and he just went back to his friends, and then they told Indra, oh, Magavan, which Maga is the Lord of clouds, he's the Lord of the skies, and can you go find out who this Yaksha is? And he said, yeah. And he hastened over to it. And then as he goes up to it, and imagine the little Yaksha just goes, boom. And so what happened is that the last one, tan nirodate, meaning that, so for Indra, it's just like, Indra runs up, and he's a very smart guy. I mean, he's got multiple heads at least. And he goes up, and the little spirit, and Indra goes, because the little spirit disappeared. And one, that's kind of like, who would dare disappear in front of Indra? Like, it's more like, oh, Indra. But the little spirit disappeared, and so Indra is completely like, because no one had ever done that to him. And then he goes into this state of stunned, and he just keeps looking. It's almost like this is his initiation, because he just is like, huh? And so he's just looking, but he's not doing an intellectual inquiry or like trying to analyze it. Oh, this happened 10 minutes ago, and this happened. And then right there where he was looking, in that same section, then the goddess Uma appears. Okay, and so this is, and so in the same region of the sky, he came across Uma, who is very beautiful. She's the daughter of the Himalayas. She's also the beloved of Shiva, and she got her name from her mother, who said, "Don't do penance. Don't do this. This self-deprecation. That all these people are doing." She said, "Ooh, ma." Ma meaning don't do the, which is all this hypocritical things that the gods do. And so, and she's just gorgeous. And so then Indra, he said, who was this Yaksha? And she says, Brahman. And then at that point, Indra was enlightened. So it's...
And it really is this moment where he, by looking again, by dropping preconceptions, his biggest preconception being that of his own identity, and being prompted to do so by this Yaksha, like dropping his identity, he has this ability to look beyond, to look deeply, and to not take action, make conclusions based on his story or his, his separateness, which is what happens to us, all of us all the time when we become wrapped up in our story, wrapped up in our own separate self, our small self, forgetting the interconnectedness with others. And so this is really relevant in terms of making resolutions, in that when we make resolutions, if we don't see ourselves as both separate and non-separate from everything else, this sort of paradoxical state where we are separate in that we have the ability to discern what needs to be done and to take action that is our own action, but not in isolation from everything else. Like that does not work when we are separate. And this is exactly, and all of these gods and all of us know that interconnectedness at certain points in life, but then we get wrapped up in our story of being Agni, or whatever our own humble or pathetic equivalent of that is.
Yeah. Then they say sometimes you get it like a flash of lightning. It's just like, oh, it's not like it's a result of a causal sequence, or even a logical sequence necessarily, though those sequences are also special. They are also Brahman. And so the ego function is, you can't get rid of it because there's nothing to get rid of. And so it also, within its context, is extremely useful, as is the entire creation, because it's all based in, this use of the principle of ignorance, but without getting into it. And so they say sometimes it's like they say it's like a flash of lightning, or it's the wink of an eye, and you kind of, and you get it. And there's one last little verse talking again about this, that the true object of all desire, or that which is Brahman, and because it's called tadvanam, and tadvanam means that which is dear or very precious, or like sweet. And so that's what the Brahman is. And that's the way to meditate. And that's the actual practice, is to meditate on that which is precious, but to all creatures, to all beings. And that's the attempt to explain it. Although sometimes after reading the Upanishad, you go, what? And that's actually a good sign.
But it's, we wanted to sort of look at this in terms of this, especially the ending, where it is this preciousness that is this shared space of tenderness, of interconnectedness, really, which is Brahman, which is
a sweetness, which is being presented as something which is like very precious, very nice, very intimate to all creatures. And this kind of takes apart a lot of the other extremes of the orthodox practices, or even the practices of the gods, because they, the Indra and friends, they got this all organized, but they get a little carried away, and they actually end up creating suffering rather than happiness for beings. And so in a resolution, the more this, you actually mix in that which is this stunning sweetness of the precious one, then the other resolutions, which you're going to make anyway, which is like, I got to exercise a little more, and so that I'll stay healthy, so that, that way I can serve others. Okay. So they always are falling back into this wider vow, this wider, because the ego can't resist being religious in the sense of the Indra and Agni and Vayu and all of the other. It can't. That's just the nature of mental structures. But that nature is to be seen as that nature in itself is Brahman. That way you're not stuck in the story for long anyway. No more than 1 billion lifetimes. Okay. So how does this relate to my New Year's resolution?
Which one?
Oh.
Yeah, no, what we were,
Well, it's to learn to work my computer better.
Yeah.
And to,
Yeah.
figure out how to do my iPhone.
And stop identifying with your computer.
Yes, I identify iPhone. I believe that this is me, and I have to tonight I won't use my phone as a pillow.
Yeah, that would be so good.
I have to stop that.
Yeah.
That's my resolution.
But it sheds this light on this idea that indeed resolutions are a wonderful ritual that we can go in for, that can reflect our intentions, that can reflect our ethical underpinnings, that can reflect, we thought a little bit about talking about the yamas and niyamas also, that can reflect what we truly believe in. But the instant, and it is this constant churning of a process that's going on for all of us all the time, the instant we start identifying with either our resolution itself or ourselves as this entity that is making this resolution rather than being part of a solution for a connection to others. If we make our resolutions more as offerings of generosity and as offerings without attachment to whether or not we can make them happen, but offer them with great deep intention for good, coming from that place that Indra experienced spontaneously of, just himself, this whole idea of how do we find moments in our day where we disappear, where at that moment we have this opportunity to wake up to the present, to what is right before our eyes, the yaksha, or the actual event that is there, and see it in bigger context. And so this art form of, yes, taking this ritualized idea of making resolutions with great intention, but then also not becoming stuck on them or stuck in what they, what we are expecting from them. That's where this art form arises. And we had, one of you who comes often, I see there, Fred, had asked last time, is there this, I really understand why we do our practices for others, but can that become a distraction? If we are practicing for others. And that's a wonderful question.
Yeah.
Because yes, it can. And it also can be the seed of deepening in the practice beyond any kind of words that you can give to it. When you are not identifying as separate from the ones to whom you are offering the practice, when you are offering it as a gesture of pure generosity, without any attachment as to whether or not anybody is going to be benefited, but just offering it into the realm of the interconnectedness that is a truth of this world. Then it becomes something that nurtures others, because the goodness is poured out there, but it also starts to nurture you yourself, because you are feeling this sense of connectedness.
Because when you're practicing eventually, so I've read, is that if you're actually paying attention to the yaksha, which is arising, particularly in practice, as sensation or as feeling or any of the senses, called the indranis, then if you make I'm doing this for others, you start to feel others as this mysterious vibrance that is very much present as, that manifests as the different patterns that we interpret as our body and stuff. So, but if you're caught in a literal formulation of who others are, and then you say, I'm doing this for them, then you get lost in their stories, which are often tragic. So I'm doing this for, these, and you're actually ignoring the sensation. You're ignoring breath, and you're ignoring your own experience of what's in front of you, behind you, above you, below you, to the left, to the right, in all the different directions. You're ignoring it.
And it's quite natural. We all do that. It's quite natural to,
to
go through
have a
phases
practice
of that. And then the more you, sort of tune back in, and the real message always is, look again more deeply, which is what the Kena Upanishad was teaching. The more we remind ourselves, or like those people we were watching outside the door at Whole Foods, look again, what's going on here. In any little situation that we have where we're behaving in sort of a less than conscious manner, which for me is most of the time. You work on it, but it's hard to stay conscious.
Yeah, because most of the thoughts that go through the mind, if you go off with them, then, and it's then when you see, and
it's fun to come back. It's like wonderful.
It's so embarrassing, to because I've been sitting here meditating for half an hour, and all I've been doing is arguing with someone from years ago, or some politician in my mind, and then just the return, you feel it, and you go, and you start to get then an intuition as to who they actually are, even those you might end up arguing with, or disagreeing with, or agreeing with. That's the nice thing about the deeper traditions, because these early Upanishads, that's how many generations, it's a long time, and
so really with this notion of resolutions, it's a wonderful thing to make resolutions and to explore that realm, but it's also this wonderful thing to just put them out there, almost like these little notes on a prayer flag, and they go off into the wind, into Vayu, and they become not the story, but just some of the sort of details of the painting of the story that you've made, sort of the background. Because if you don't make resolutions, and resolutions might not be the correct word, but if you don't have intention in what you are doing and hold your feet to the fire of truth and kindness and generosity, of interconnectedness, then you really are perpetuating this sense of separateness rather than a sense of interconnectedness. And so when we look at our resolutions as something that helps us to be...
Because you do have intention, And oftentimes they're not very nice.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the nature of mind.
Yeah.
It has intentions. Even if you're completely semi-conscious, you've got those things.
So we encourage you to not only on, when the year changes, to think in terms of making sort of gestures or resolutions, but to do that almost as a practice, like on a daily basis, in a sense, to really put into action and intention your intention that is not about yourself as separate, because that's where you get trapped, is when you start feeling this separateness. But to really bring the ability to look again deeply, and offer to others, which turns out to be like a metta practice, an ongoing three-dimensional metta practice that you can almost do as a practice. Like, what can I resolve to do that's in line with my beliefs, my intentions, that's supportive to others? What can I do today? And then once you start doing it on a sort of more regular basis, rather than just, I'm going to stop drinking on after New Year's Eve, then you start having more clarity in what all of your actions are. And it's never fully conscious, but there is this, you're greasing the wheels of your own awareness by doing so. So in a sense, that's kind of a way of looking at resolutions from a yogic perspective.
Yeah. And maybe for next time, but in the yoga practice, the idea is that time is this whole creation of mind, and that moment by moment you're actually going through the entire cycle of the universe. And so it's every moment is New Year's. And New Year's Eve too.
Yeah.
So you got
That's a good one.
yeah.
So you got lots of opportunities.
Yeah. Time is really flexible. So we should
So we will wrap it up. We will we'll stop the recording, and then we'll stick around if there are questions that anyone has. But once more, we really want to thank you all for coming. It's so good to see your faces and to see your names up there, and just wonderful. And please keep practicing. Hey, Val, keep asking questions, and keep looking over and over and over at what you think you already know. So thank you.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.